frost on the roof beams, smoke curling up through the gap where the wall meets the thatch. A man kneels by a bronze bowl of water, and he's not sharpening a blade. He's leaning in close, one hand steady on his knee, the other bringing a small dark stick right up to his eye. He's not preparing for a raid. He's getting ready to go to the market. Around him, other men are doing the same thing, combing out beards that have been oiled since sunrise, running iron tweezers along a jawline, checking their reflection in a polished disc of metal. It actually matters what they look like today. Here's the question. Why would some of the most feared men in medieval Europe, men whose reputation still makes historians flinch, spend their mornings on their appearance like this? You've seen the image 1,000 times. Blue and black paint smeared across a warrior's face, screaming into battle, terrifying his enemies before he even swings an axe. Movies love it. Games love it. It's become shorthand for Viking, the same way horned helmets have. Visually perfect, historically almost non-existent. This isn't that story. Because the real evidence doesn't point to war paint at all. It points somewhere stranger, and somewhere that says a lot more about who these men actually were. In the year 921, an Arab diplomat and scholar named Ahmad ibn Fadlan set out from Baghdad on a mission north, through Persia, across the steppe, and eventually to the banks of the Volga River, deep in what's now Russia. His job was diplomatic. What he actually produced was something far more valuable to us. An eyewitness account of a group of Norse traders the local Arabic sources called the Rus, Swedish Vikings, who had pushed east along the river trade routes toward the Caspian Sea. Ibn Fadlan wasn't impressed by their hygiene in general. He had plenty to say about that, and none of it flattering. But one detail stops most readers cold. He describes these Rus men, armed, tattooed, physically imposing, applying a dark cosmetic around their eyes every single day. Not before a fight, not for ritual, as a matter of routine, the way you'd brush your teeth. The word most translations use is close to kohl, the same style of eye cosmetic that had circulated through the Middle East and North Africa for centuries, made from ground minerals like antimony or soot-based pigments. And according to Ibn Fadlan, it wasn't optional. Men and women both wore it. In his account, it was considered part of looking presentable, arguably part of looking attractive. Here's the thing nobody tells you. This wasn't war paint. It was makeup. Daily, mundane, done in peacetime, done for other people to see you looking your best. And that raises a much bigger question than, did Vikings wear eyeliner? If grooming was this normalized among Norse traders on a foreign river 1,000 miles from home, what did it look like back in Scandinavia, where nobody outside was watching at all? Ibn Fadlan's account is a single outside observer, in one place, at one moment. On its own, historians would treat it carefully, maybe even skeptically. But it doesn't stand alone. Across Scandinavia and in Viking Age burial sites throughout the British Isles, archaeologists keep finding the same small cluster of objects buried alongside male skeletons. Tweezers, combs, razors, and tiny ear-cleaning spoons, often carried on a single ring at the belt like a personal grooming kit. Not occasionally, consistently. In graves of men who, by every other marker, weapons, ship rivets, battle trauma on the bones, were clearly warriors. Combs specifically turn up so often in Viking graves that they're now considered one of the most common personal items found across the entire Viking world, carved from antler or bone, sometimes elaborately decorated, sometimes carried in their own little protective case like the owner genuinely didn't want it scratched up in his pocket. Here's the tease worth sitting with for a second. Why would a warrior culture, the same culture responsible for burning monasteries and terrifying half of Europe, care this much about a comb? The uncomfortable answer for the savage horde stereotype is that grooming and violence weren't opposites in Norse society. They lived in the same man. A Viking raider could kill you at dawn and be combing lye-bleached hair by a fire that same night, and neither behavior contradicted the other in his own mind. Appearance was part of status. A well-groomed man wasn't seen as soft. He was seen as someone who had his life in order enough to bother. But there's a twist to this that historians rarely mention, and it didn't happen in Scandinavia at all. It happened somewhere the Vikings weren't supposed to be welcome, and it turned their grooming habits into a genuine social problem. Roughly 3 centuries after Ibn Fadlan's journey, an English chronicler named John of Wallingford, writing at St. Albans Abbey, recorded something that reads almost like a piece of medieval gossip column. He complained, and he wasn't being subtle about it, that Danish settlers living in England had developed a reputation for being too well kept. According to his account, these Danish men combed their hair daily, bathed once a week on Saturdays, and changed their clothes regularly. To the English audience he was writing for, this wasn't a compliment, it was a scandal. Because, in his telling, this level of grooming was making Danish men noticeably more attractive to English women than the local competition, enough that it was becoming a source of real resentment among English men. Wallingford's account frames Norse-descended men in England as winning social ground, not through conquest, but through personal hygiene. Now, a fair caveat, and one worth being upfront about. John of Wallingford was writing generations after the events he described, with his own biases about the Danish presence in England, and chroniclers of this period weren't exactly neutral reporters. This is one written account, filtered through resentment, not a scientific survey. Historians treat it as suggestive, not proof of a universal standard. But suggestive is still significant. It lines up with what the graves already told us, and with what Ibn Fadlan saw on the Volga 300 years earlier and a continent away. 3 unconnected sources: an Arab diplomat, a scattering of archaeological finds, and a resentful English monk, all independently pointing at the same trait. Norsemen, across very different times and places, took their appearance seriously enough that outsiders kept noticing it and writing it down. That's not one anecdote. That's a pattern. There's one more piece, and it's the strangest of the 4. Some historical sources describing Norse and Danish men in this period mention a practice of lightening hair using a soap with a very high lye content, strong enough to bleach the hair pale, sometimes almost white blonde, over repeated use. It's the kind of detail that sounds like folk myth until you notice it keeps surfacing independently in accounts of Norse appearance across different regions. Combine that with the kohl-lined eyes and the daily combing, and a picture starts to form that's almost the exact opposite of the horned helmet, mud-caked barbarian image most of us grew up with. This is a culture where personal presentation, pale hair, lined eyes, a groomed beard, functioned almost like a uniform of status. Looking a certain way wasn't vanity in the shallow sense. It was communication. It told other people, at a glance, who you were and what you were worth. The grooming kits in the graves weren't really about looking good for a trip to market. They were about looking like someone worth respecting, every single day, whether anyone from outside was watching or not. Here's where this stops being a fun fact and starts being uncomfortable. We inherited an image of the Viking as pure chaos, a figure defined entirely by violence, with nothing underneath it but rage and salt water. That image sells movie tickets. It does not survive contact with a comb found in a warrior's grave, or a diplomat's diary entry about daily eyeliner, or a monk complaining that Danish men were too clean for their own good. The real picture is a man who could be genuinely brutal in one setting and genuinely vain in another. Not because he was contradictory, but because both were part of the same code. Status, presentation, being seen as someone who mattered. And here's the part that stings a little. We still do this. We still judge people instantly on grooming, on whether someone has their life together, based on how put together they look. We still tie appearance to status, to attractiveness, to how seriously the world takes us before we've said a single word. We just tell ourselves that's a modern invention, a product of Instagram, of skincare marketing, of a culture obsessed with image in a way older, simpler societies supposedly weren't. They were exactly as obsessed as we are. They just used a bronze bowl of water instead of a phone camera. And think about what that actually means for how we've been taught to see them. Every documentary, every movie poster, every game cover sells you the same single note: rage, an axe mid-swing, a face twisted mid-scream, nothing else going on underneath it. It's a flat, one-dimensional read of an entire culture. And it survives mostly because it's easy to sell, not because it's accurate. The truth is messier, and messier is almost always more human. A man who spent an hour combing lye-bleached hair and lining his eyes before he ever raised a weapon wasn't performing softness. He was performing status, The same instinct that makes someone today iron a shirt before a job interview, or check their reflection before walking into a room full of strangers. Vanity and violence were never opposites in his mind, because his world never asked him to separate them. Ours still doesn't. Not really. We just pretend it does. That's the uncomfortable mirror this whole topic holds up. The savage label was always more about who was writing the history than who was living it. Tonight, check your hair in the mirror before you leave. Straighten something. You're doing exactly what a Viking trader did on the Volga 1100 years ago. Not for war, just because it mattered. Even historians argue about what was actually in that dark stick he pressed to his eyelid. Kohl, maybe. Maybe something else. The word doesn't translate clean. And the substance itself is long gone. We know the grooming was real. We know it wasn't war paint. The rest we'll probably never fully get back.